It's been branded Operation Red Meat, and the end of the BBC as we know it was served up as the first dish. Policy designed to please restless Tories. The Culture Secretary tweeted during a tricky weekend for the Prime Minister, this, the current multi-year licence fee announcement, will be the last. In the Commons today, she said policy had not yet been decided.
Bring it on, everybody in this House. Let's discuss what a BBC in 2027 will look like. It is not a policy. We're announcing a debate and a discussion. Let's all get involved positively.
Some Tory MPs signalled they didn't like the direction of policy.
If the choice is between the United States or the state, public broadcasting for the BBC and Channel 4 is better, in my view, than having everything go to some of the big media people around the world who won't maintain the kind of BBC which we've had for the last 100 years.
Headlines overnight announcing that the Prime Minister was calling in the military to deal with channel crossings looked intended to create the impression of naval vessels being deployed. It's actually about some new changes to who's responsible for what in Whitehall.
I'm not interested in dog whistle politics, and I'm not interested in knee-jerk politics.
Sir Roger Gale, who's already submitted a letter demanding a vote of no confidence in the Prime Minister, not convinced by the policy headlines generated by Number 10. Another Tory MP, one leaders don't want to cross, sounded less than impressed.
Do you expect the Prime Minister to lead us into the next election, or Boris Johnson?
I think it's in a situation as volatile as this, it's impossible to say, and I regret that very much. I would still prefer that Boris Johnson were a roaring success, but right now, listening to the public, who remember very well all the sacrifices they made, I think people may well be too angry to forgive, but it remains to be seen.
And how much anger in your constituency?
Oh, absolutely furious.
There was some good news for the Prime Minister in our poll of Tory members conducted over the weekend. Asked whether Boris Johnson should stay as leader, 63% of Tory members we surveyed said he should. A quarter said he should go. But only 46% of Tory members we polled thought Boris Johnson was telling the truth about Downing Street parties. 29% said he was not. A quarter said they didn't know. You actually think if he stays, you might get a better Boris Johnson?
I think it would. He's been chastened, he's got his tail between his legs. It's possible that it might be the wake-up call he's needed.
So stay, but we're keeping an eye on you?
Yes, last warning, I think, is the crux of it.
I think Boris Johnson needs to step aside. I think that he has, regardless of his involvement and whether he feels that he was involved to the extent that it's been portrayed, I think the hurt is so much by it and people have been so triggered and traumatised by this that he needs to be a leader and to accept responsibility for it.
If, as many have speculated, the top two names emerging from the ballots of MPs were to end up as Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss, our poll of members suggests they'd swing behind the Chancellor over the Foreign Secretary by a very large margin. But first, the party must decide if it truly wants a contest. You've been in the party 66 years.
Yes.
You've smelt blood over the years.
Yes,
Are you smelling blood now?
Yes, I do. I think there's more blood around now than at any other time. I mean, the party's in a bad way at the moment.
But you smell blood.
Yes.
It could be curtains.
Oh, yeah, it could be, but it might not be.
50-50 in your mind?
I think it's 50-50, yes.
It hangs in the balance?
Yes, it hangs in the balance.
In the last hour, Dominic Cummings has doused the flames dancing around the Prime Minister, disputing Boris Johnson's insistence that no one told him ahead of the May 2020 garden party that it shouldn't happen. So, what Dominic Cummings is saying effectively tonight is that Boris Johnson, when he came for that extraordinary moment last week to the Commons and apologised over the 20th of May party in the garden of Downing Street, that he was lying on that occasion, Dominic Cummings is alleging. He's saying that when the Prime Minister says the first I knew that there was any kind of social gathering happening was when I walked out into the garden to stir the troops and thank them for all their kind work. Dominic Cummings says that he and others would swear on oath that they tried to warn the Prime Minister off of having that party, and that he has effectively lied to the House of Commons. And just for good measure, Dominic Cummings has revived an allegation that he made once before, that the Prime Minister had to be stopped on a separate occasion from going to see the Queen for an audience when he might have been infectious. And that is something that Downing Street have denied. Again, Dominic Cummings is accusing Downing Street of lying. And for extra good measure, Dominic Cummings is saying there are more photos lurking out there of some of these parties that we've been hearing about. Boris Johnson obviously pulled Dominic Cummings in because of his campaign abilities. He doesn't appear to have lost those ruthless abilities. As for Boris Johnson's campaign, the red meat campaign, as it's been known inside at least one or two Downing Street meetings, well, that seems to have got off to a pretty shaky start.
Gary, thanks very much. Well, earlier I spoke to the former Culture Secretary, John Whittingdale, and I began by asking him whether this announcement on the BBC was the centrepiece of Operation Save Big Dog or Operation Red Meat.
No, I think that they are two quite important announcements which are timely. In some ways, the licence fee, I've been surprised that we haven't done an announcement earlier. It was expected before Christmas, and it's actually taken quite a time to get there. And it's very important for the BBC that they get that degree of certainty moving forward. So, I think there will be relief in the BBC that they now know the future, and I think it was absolutely right to get that out as soon as we could.
Well, I would say relief in the BBC is not something we've seen today. They put out a statement saying because the licence fee is being frozen for 2 years, they point out that income for UK services is already 30% lower in real terms than 10 years ago. They're saying tougher choices will now have to be made. I wonder what programmes or channels you'd like to see axed.
Well, I've always been very careful to say that it is for the BBC to decide how they distribute the funding they receive, and certainly it is not for MPs or government ministers to tell them what programme they should broadcast and what they shouldn't.
But would you be happy to see some programmes dumped?
I absolutely accept that this is going to be tough for the BBC. It does represent a real terms cut over 2 years, but this is a time when everybody is having to make savings, and the licence fee, which is a flat rate tax paid by every household, no matter how low your income, I do think now is the time when it is right that we shouldn't add to the burden on those households.
Isn't 43p a day incredible value for money, though?
Well, it depends how you define value for money. I'm a supporter of the BBC. I think it does a great job, and I want to see it thrive into the future. But you have to remember that £159 is a lot of money for some households, and the prospect of it going up each year I think was unreasonable at this time.
Nadine Dorries pledged to abolish the licence fee in a tweet at the weekend. She was slightly more tentative in the House of Commons today. Do you think it's not going to happen?
I think it has to happen in the longer term. As I said this afternoon, last year 700,000 people stopped paying the licence fee, and they did so, a large number, because they said they didn't use the BBC anymore. There was such a wide range of choice from all the streaming services, they just didn't need it. And that number's going to grow. And I think that in the long term, the licence fee is going to be very hard to sustain, and we need to look at alternatives.
But Nadine Dorries was clear in the comments that she didn't have any alternatives. So can you help her out on that?
I wouldn't like to see advertising on the BBC, not least because it would hugely damage those broadcasters like yours who do depend on advertising. It would just cut the amount of money available. I think there is a possibility of moving towards a voluntary subscription model, at least in part. But of course, we have to have universal take-up of fast broadband before you can do that. There are certain elements which the BBC carry out at the moment which couldn't be funded by subscription. I mean, the BBC Radio, for instance, there is no way in which at the moment you could have a subscription model on radio. Equally, the World Service, both the online provision, the radio provision, the TV provision. So I think there will always need to be public funding of the BBC. It may well be that, and I think I would support a continuation of public funding for things like news and current affairs, which I think are a public good.
So not revenge for Brexit coverage, then?
Absolutely not. I mean, I've been critical of the BBC's Brexit coverage, and I will go on saying to the BBC that I don't think they necessarily got it right. But in my mind, and I'm absolutely convinced the government's mind, that is a totally separate issue.
You were Margaret Thatcher's private secretary. Can you imagine her allowing a party at number 10 during lockdown?
Well, that's an entirely hypothetical question on a completely different subject to the one which we were going to be talking about. But Margaret Thatcher was a stickler for keeping to the rules, and I've absolutely no doubt that she would have done so.
Dominic Cummings says that he's prepared to swear under oath that the Prime Minister has misled the 20th Party. Is it time for him to go?
Look, I come in here to talk about the BBC, not about parties and the future Prime Minister. I don't think it's the time for him to go, but I'm not going to talk about that now.